here. Missing ingredients for the Hare family's cake. A handful of sweet red berries, chocolate, some milk, and beet syrup. Now if I fold it like this, and then... ta-da! A pot.
Oh! Are you going to cook something? What is it?
Let's see.
Not that I need anything. I can manage all by myself. Ooh! Now that looks tasty. If that cheese were also seasoned right, well, I might actually be tempted.
Rose hips are cool, but disappointingly useless. Here's a handwritten note. Beware, this is crow territory. For as long as it's unsafe by the river, I will be broadcasting from the swamp. Mousewood Radio. The voice of Mousewood won't give up. Signed, Ludwig Borrower. P.S. Alright, I do give up. Now the swamp part is flooded as well. I'm going to be off the air until it's cleared. The building is a shambles. I can't shake the feeling that the crows around here are pretty unpleasant company.
That smells so incredibly good. A well-peppered cheese fondue. I bet it would keep me fed for a week.
Would you give me some red berries in exchange?
Berries? Who needs them anyway? Take as many as you like.
If they taste as good as they smell. By now I must have collected enough berries for 4 games at least. If they taste as good as they smell. By now I must have collected enough berries for 4 games at least.
Hello, Jeremiah. Did you know that the moon is responsible for the tides? But my old friend the moon has nothing to do with this flood, or with the wild crows that haunt this area during the day. Do you see the lights on the other side of the river? Over there looms the beginning of the sad story for Mousewood's folk. I hope it will have a happy ending.
Isn't there something we can do to help?
That is out of our hands, I'm afraid. But wait, let me tell you a beautiful story from the time before the flood. It's about the old magician visiting the post office by the river. Would you like to hear it? Did you like my story? I often find strange things between the worlds. Fragments of stories long forgotten, lost beginnings, and lost endings. Perhaps there's something you have forgotten. Maybe I can find what you have lost.
Second story. A wizard at the post office. One morning, a really old wizard living on the outskirts of Mousewood decided to pay a visit to the post office. The wizard was very wise and knowledgeable, but he rarely talked to his neighbours, like the Hedgehog brothers who resided a few steps further towards Mousewood town centre, or the Toad family of Meadow Pond. He was leaning on his bedroom windowsill, enjoying the refreshing view of green meadows, when through the foggy morning dew, which sparkled in the early sunlight, he noticed 2 familiar figures trundling along the track nearby. One didn't need magical powers to spot that these were the Hedgehog brothers on their way to the river, even though at that time of day they were usually headed in the opposite direction to the edge of the forest, where they could get all kinds of building materials. One would, however, need magical powers to know that these two were on their way to the post office to pick up a delivery. They had ordered new tools for their carpentry business. The wizard felt that he, too, should pay the post office a visit. He had a magical hunch, as skilled wizards like himself tend to have from time to time. He sensed that he had to go to the post office to receive a letter. What he didn't know, though, was if the postman was ill or had simply forgotten his post. Magical hunches tend not to be all that accurate, so a lot of wizards don't really pay attention to them when they come to mind. But our wizard didn't really have anything else to do. He took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. Then he closed the window and grabbed his case, a wooden case with shoulder straps made of leather. He always had the case with him, as a wizard has to expect to be asked for help, and should thus have a few helpful things at hand. The wizard hurried down the stairs, packed a bit of this and a bit of that, then unlatched his massive wooden front door and stepped outside. High above him, the wind rustled the green crown of the beech tree, the very same beech he had stood beneath many years before when he decided to build his home here. Back then, his beard had already been white, though shorter and scraggier. The Hedgehog brothers' father had run a carpentry business and supervised the construction of the wizard's house. Just like his sons, he was a master of his craft. The wizard turned and walked along the path from his house to the wider track that ran beside the fields. The sun was busy spreading its warmth across the path, driving the moisture from the dark sand, slowly turning the rich, humid brown to a lighter, dry tone. The scrubby weeds at the roadside were still heavy with dew, which bent them towards the ground where they sleepily rested on each other. Some of them sprang up as if startled from sleep as soon as the old man, who knew many, but not, of course, all the secrets of magic, brushed them with his feet. The wizard hitched the strap of his case over his right shoulder, clutched it close to his body with his left hand, and began walking faster. The sound of the sand under his feet and the wide fields blending into the horizon lit a spark in the wizard's eyes. The choice of paths and destinations a rambler had here, and the unconditional beauty of the landscape, reminded him of the freedom he had to roam wherever he wished, while still having the possibility to return home. Having this meant having almost everything one could wish for. With almost everything in his luggage necessary for a happy life, the old man walked on and on. In the distance he could see people working in the fields. This view was unusual for him, as he lived on the outskirts of Mousewood, where humans were rare visitors. For the people, the wizard pondered, it would be the other way round. They would be surprised if they saw animals at work. If, for example, a badger crossed their path carrying paintbrush and easel and politely greeted them, the most courteous response he could hope for would be something along the lines of, "Look, a badger. They live in the woods and eat beetles, I think." The other humans would simply nod and return to their human business. Why that is, most animals can only guess. Perhaps humans have poor eyesight. Perhaps they're a bit dim-witted or eat overripe mushrooms. And those can have strange side effects, as animals know. Or maybe they can't take something that's smaller than them seriously. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Most humans just seem to have forgotten how to live among animals. Those farmhands would even have been bewildered at the sight of a wizard at the post office, especially seeing that the post office was run by a beaver. A few steps further on, the old man came to a house made of coarse stones, effortlessly holding up a thick thatched roof. He noticed a mother rabbit hanging out her laundry in the front yard. A baby rabbit sat beside her on a stump, watching her with curiosity. Each time she took a fresh piece of laundry from her basket, the boy looked closely, eager to know if it was a shirt or socks or something completely different. As she pulled it out and hung it over the clothes line, he jumped up and ran right under the piece of laundry so he could see exactly how she hung it on the line. Then he looked at her again to see what she'd do next. And as she reached into the basket, he sat down again on the stump, no less excited than before and eager to see the next piece of clothing to be hung up. Even though the wizard wasn't the chattiest person in the forest, he did talk to the mother rabbit now and then about this and that when they met on the path or elsewhere. And since she was no longer the youngest rabbit, and he was definitely old, they had been neighbours long enough to fit in a lot of now and thens, and so knew each other pretty well. "Hello, Mrs. Rabbit," said the wizard, and was quite startled by the sound of his own voice, since he had been lost in thought for days, talking to no one but himself. The little rabbit turned to the wizard, and her big rabbit eyes took in the old man. For a second he gazed back from under his white bushy brows in similar bewilderment. "Why, hello, where are you heading?" she asked, a pile of towels under her arm. "I'm on the way to the post office," he replied. "So you're expecting something," the rabbit lady said, as she sorted socks by colour. "Indeed, a letter. It's just a magical hunch, but it won't hurt to pay the beaver a visit, will it? At least the fresh air will do me some good." "That's for sure," replied the rabbit, and with 2 quick waves of her hand, turned a duvet cover inside out, and with 2 more skilled twists, threw it over the last free section of clothesline. Then she picked up 2 clothes pegs and handed them to the boy. With a resolute look, he took the pegs, got up on the stump he'd been sitting on, and stretched out his arms in front of him. His mother lifted him up to reach the clothesline and peg the cover to the line. He folded his arms and inspected his work. His mother sat him down in this position and turned back to the wizard. "My son Tim has no school today, and I have so much to do, he's bound to get bored. Would you mind taking him with you to the post office?" The old man would have been grateful for the opportunity to think about this request for a while and decide if it was a good idea. As he lowered his head to think about it for at least a moment, his gaze met those big rabbit eyes again. Tim was all set and even had his rucksack ready, which caused the wizard to murmur in astonishment, which otherwise happened only rarely. The wise old man and his young companion set off, accompanied by a fresh midday breeze. The young rabbit had no difficulty keeping up with the pace of the, at least compared to a rabbit, giant wizard, but the man walked a tad slower than usual anyway. They walked on for a while, and then walked on for another while, in silence, past whispering meadows. A couple of steps away from the path, a gnarled tree creaked, and along with 2 scrubby bushes growing comfortably by its knotty trunk, couldn't help but notice the wizard's intense silence. The man, trained in the arts of magic, wasn't sure if it would be better to stay silent or actually say something, and even if he'd been sure it would be better to say something, he would still have struggled to come up with something to say. As he pondered this problem, he missed a gnarled root sticking out of the ground in front of him. He staggered, flailed around in surprise, and seemed about to tumble. But eventually he regained his balance and steadied himself. Taking a deep breath and smoothing down his beard, he noticed Tim peering at him. The old man looked down, unable to spot any harm or injury. "I'm all right," said the wizard. "Let's be on our way." "Onward ho!" said Tim, and started walking at a slower pace than young rabbits usually do, even though the wizard hadn't hurt himself. So they left the root behind, along with the gnarled tree that didn't seem to be in the slightest involved in this episode. On their way, the 2 of them met a hedgehog who was spreading out a red and white checked blanket on the grass by the bridge across the gushing stream that had to be crossed on the way to the post office. He seemed to be just settling down for a lunch break and was taking some sandwiches out of a basket beside him. As he noticed the 2 hikers, he stopped what he was doing, stood up, and with a broad, happy smile, asked with blinking hedgehog eyes, "Where are you two heading?" "To the stream," the old man replied. "My young friend and I are on our way to the post office." Tim and the wizard stood by the wayside, both of them realizing that it was about lunchtime. This obviously didn't escape the hedgehog, and he decided a tasty sandwich would do the two of them good. Fresh country air provides a healthy appetite, and if there was one thing there was no shortage of out here, it was country air. "May I offer you a little refreshment?" asked the hedgehog, who loved to pack a little something more than he could actually eat, as he also loved to share. Tim looked inquisitively at the wizard as the old man answered, "Well, thank you. We very much appreciate the offer." Tim continued to look up at him inquisitively. With a slight creaking sound, the wizard bent down to the young rabbit. He explained that you shouldn't usually accept things from strangers if you're not a wizard. Wizards always know if they're dealing with a scoundrel or simply a friendly stranger. Tim nodded in agreement. The hedgehog pretended to overhear the fact he was being merely deemed a stranger who happened to be friendly. He was a modest fellow, so he didn't dwell on it, and instead handed his guests his most delicious sandwiches, which was difficult because when it came to sandwiches, he was a master of his craft, so they were all truly delicious. The three of them sat beside the stream, enjoying their lunch, and talked. The hedgehog introduced himself as Heinz. He was a cousin of the Hedgehog brothers, who were, as Heinz explained, also on their way to the post office. The wizard recalled seeing them in the morning as he looked out of his window. The hedgehogs were planning to pick up their cousin here at the stream on their way back. After all, they knew he enjoyed sitting in the sun, listening to the stream's unhurried murmuring. And Heinz knew they wouldn't take a break, even for tasty sandwiches like these, if they were picking up new tools. So he decided to wait for them right there. Tim ventured to the bank and had a look round. "Look at this," he called out. Both cautiously made their way through the tall grass along the water's edge. The stream was full of tiny fish, struggling against the smooth current. The three of them watched the opalescent fish and the crystal-clear water for a while. Around them, beetles buzzed through the air, enjoying the sunshine and the gentle breeze. It seemed to be cooler in the shade down under the bridge, where a gurgling ripple could be heard. From the opposite side of the stream, Heinz waved goodbye as Tim and the wizard crossed the bridge. Tim waved back and kept looking back until he could no longer see the hedgehog because of the tall grass. Tim now walked a few paces ahead, but stopped to listen when their feet took them into a part of the forest where the ground was covered in a thick layer of pine needles. Even a fully fledged wizard can't match the listening skills of a young rabbit. The wise man listened, but the forest was so silent he could hear nothing but his own heartbeat. The rabbit's ears, however, were so keen that he could clearly hear two voices singing merrily further along the path. Shortly afterwards, the wizard also became aware of two hedgehogs approaching. It was the Hedgehog brothers, on their way back after successfully picking up their new tools from the post office. "A brand new hammer is a wonderful thing. Our old one has long lost its swing. A new saw helps us build your home. The old one, well, just made us groan. New tools were sent us through the post, for carpentry's what we like most." The Hedgehog brothers continued the song by rhythmically imitating various tools. But when they noticed two people in the forest crossing their path, they stopped. They probably preferred to sing without an audience. After recognizing two familiar faces, they raised their hats as they approached. "Good day to you, Master Wizard," they greeted in unison. The wizard gave them a friendly wave, and Tim nodded politely. "Looks like you've got everything you ordered," said the wizard. "Absolutely right," one hedgehog brother replied happily. He could easily be told apart from his brother, as he was wearing blue dungarees. "But we've got to be on our way now. Our cousin's waiting for us in the meadows near the stream. I hope the wait isn't too boring for him. He's got no tools, you know." said his brother in the red dungarees. Not to worry, the wizard replied. Not to worry, Tim added. And so the Hedgehog brothers walked on towards Mousewood, while the young rabbit and his aged companion followed the stream to the post office, which stood on the bank among some old willow trees. Here we are, the post office, said the wizard in a portentous voice. Tim was very impressed. On the side of the building facing the river, a water wheel rustled and clattered. A rustic pier led to a boat, waiting to stem itself against the stream or gently glide through the water to other forests, towns, and post offices, maybe even as far as the sea. As they entered, they were greeted by the postmaster, a stout beaver who was sorting letters at his desk. Beside him stood piles of carefully wrapped parcels. "Hello there, Mr. Beaver. Do you have any post for me?" the wizard asked politely. "No, I'm sorry. I'd know if I did," the beaver said, adding, "Besides, you should know we deliver directly to you." "Well, that is if something's been left here, but—" and he gestured towards some pigeonholes reserved for the wizard's district of Mousewood. "Nothing has." "That's okay," the wise old man replied, pondering. "That's the thing with magical hunches. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't." Nevertheless, he still had the uncanny feeling there was post waiting for him. He didn't think it wise to mention this at the post office, though. If the beaver told him there was no post, there was no post. As the wizard continued to ponder, accompanied by the water wheel's helpful rattling, the stout postmaster told Tim of the time when Mousewood almost underwent a name change, a matter that had caused him many a sleepless night. You can't just change a forest's name. It's especially harrowing for a postman. Tim agreed. As noon turned to afternoon, and the sun's rays took on a warm golden yellow, the little rabbit and the wizard, still pondering, made their way home. As they walked beneath regal pines, the old man looked up and let his gaze rest upon an exhilarating symphony of light and shadow. High above them, spiders' webs shimmered between the branches. Old, abandoned, and riddled with holes, their creators had long since left on 8 busy legs. "Just look at that," the wizard said, and pointed upwards. Tim was delighted by the spectacle high overhead, and found out after a while that, if he spun around on the spot while looking up at the webs, the sunlight caught in them refracted into opalescent colours. With a harumph, the wizard looked down at him. "I don't suppose your mother would be too happy if I told her you were spinning around like that." Tim looked at the wizard, who blocked out the sun and treetops like an old cloud. Then the wizard shook with laughter and started spinning himself. Then Tim began to laugh. A family of mice, who had just curled up with their evening tea, listened to the disturbance in their otherwise quiet neighbourhood. But while their kids acted as if they'd be held responsible for all the noise, eventually the mouse father couldn't hold back any longer and joined in. Along with his wife and the mice's grandmother, they rocked with laughter. Tim and the wizard arrived back at the bridge, passing the meadow where they had met Heinz. Both walked a little slower as they remembered the kind hedgehog, as well as the shiny fish they had watched in the stream. Further along the path, Tim noticed a familiar root. He politely asked the wizard to stand back. Then he hopped from where he stood, as rabbits tend to do, right over the root without difficulty. He glanced back and assured his companion that this method of passing the root was completely safe. The wizard gave a stern look at the snare that had caused him to stumble that afternoon. Then he performed a lively and, for such an old wizard, impressive hop right over it. As he landed, the wizard glanced down at the root. It stuck out of the ground as innocently as a root can. The gnarled tree nearby would probably have enjoyed the spectacle, but right now it seemed to be taking a nap. The wizard snapped his fingers, and the air filled with glistening, crackling sparks. With a rustle, the root disappeared into the earth of the forest. After this magical sleight of hand, the old man rejoined his companion, and together they continued on their way, just like two ramblers who know at least two safe methods to get past roots crossing your path. After a while they reached the house where the wizard had met the little rabbit and his mother that morning. The laundry waved in the gentle evening breeze. "I'm home," Tim shouted, and a few moments later the door opened and 5 curious rabbit heads poked out. Mrs. Rabbit made her way through Tim's siblings, drying her hands on a tea towel. She laughingly embraced the little rabbit as he leapt up at her. On the doorstep, the family bade the wizard farewell, and none of the little rabbits let him leave without a hearty "Goodbye." The wizard bowed and wished them a good evening. "Many thanks for your company on the way to the post office, my young friend," the old man said to Tim, who waved one last farewell. Then Mrs. Rabbit and her children went into the house. Leaving the rabbit family behind him, the wizard made his way home. Around him, in the tall grass, the songs of crickets and locusts could be heard, bidding their own farewell to the fading sun, which was approaching the horizon at a leisurely pace. In the distance, dusk had already fallen, but everywhere the wizard looked, humans, animals, and whatever else lived under this evening sky seemed utterly content. And as he turned off the forest road onto the path leading to his house, his high beech tree, which had kept a silent vigil over his home, greeted him. His eyes wandered upwards to the treetop. Then he unlatched the massive wooden door, put his case down, and took a look around the house, like someone who had journeyed far and almost forgotten what his home looked like. With one more glance at the evening sky, the wizard closed the door. The magical hunch regarding his post might have been a red herring, but paying the post office a visit had been a good idea nonetheless. Of that the old man was certain. Meanwhile, at the rabbit family's house, Tim sat down at his father's desk, took a sheet of paper, and started writing, as neatly as he could. "Dear wizard," so that the old man would remember this day, he wanted to write to him about how they had met Heinz, the kind hedgehog with his sandwiches, about the Hedgehog brothers' song, about the boat bobbing up and down in the stream, and of course about the stout beaver, who was sure to deliver this letter reliably. Third story.
On the door it says, "Premium Dwarf Root Storage." It also says, "Hands off." And it is firmly locked. Nah, it's standing still. I probably shouldn't touch it. Nothing needs to be tapped from there. The dwarves have restarted their blue juice production, but I wouldn't be able to sleep with that noise. I'm so tired. The dwarves are snoring like a storm.
Funny little boy.
Perfect. Hey, juice is already coming out of the tap. Now I have beet syrup on tap. A mug full of thick, sweet syrup. Now I have beet syrup on tap. All I need is a container. A mug full of thick, sweet syrup.
Extravagant. Welcome back. An ingredient for the cake. Thank you, my little cracker crust. All that's missing now is some milk and beet syrup. An ingredient for the cake. Thank you, my little cracker crust. All that's missing now is some milk. You're funny, little boy.
If someone could just get one. Help us, vete, hedgehog flew.
Still smells okay. Now I've got milk. Still smells okay.
If someone could just get one.
Extravagant. Welcome back. That's an ingredient for the Hare family's cake. Now we have everything honeycomb. By tomorrow, I'll bake a fantastic treat, and then you can pick it up and take it to the Hare family. Maybe they'll even invite you to their birthday party, my little meringue.
About the cake for the Hare family, again.
By tomorrow, I'll bake a pancake-tastic treat, and then you can pick it up and take it to the Hare family. Maybe they'll even invite you to their birthday party, my little meringue.
About the preparation for the Treetop Festival.
Everything will be ready, cream puff. The dwarves are brewing blue juice again. The Treetop Festival can come.
See you later.
Take care.
That sure looks tasty.
Thank you. Can you take it to the hare family?
Sure.
Thank you, my little cracker crust.
Anya's cake for the hare family looks really yummy. Hello, Mr. Hare. I brought the cake you ordered from Anya.
Oh, wonderful. It's about time. Looks like you aren't completely useless after all. Oh, cake looks good. You know what? I will make a major exception for you. As of today, you can officially take part in our popular hare parties, known far and wide.
Wow!
Well, don't just stand there. Go, enjoy the party.
What a moody fellow. I hope the rest of his family is a little more laid back. Wow, what a party. There sure are a lot of people here.
Birthdays are always a big deal for the hare family.
But don't the hares celebrate a birthday every day?
Of course! It's perfectly normal in such a big family.
Bottoms up! Who wants to think about tomorrow today? Today is everybody's birthday. Yours too. Here, take this.
There's something engraved here. Peter Mouse Trophy Paradise. Special moments at rock bottom prices. Now they can finally serve food at the party.
Oh, at last I can enjoy the party in peace. My younger siblings are insufferable when there's no cake.
Bottoms up! Who wants to think about tomorrow today? Today is everybody's birthday. Here, take this.
Another one of those cards. The hares really know how to party.
Isn't it a pleasure to see the hares celebrating?
Although I've completely lost track of whose birthday it is today.
Oh, there are presents too. Or rather, a mailbox. Well, the one getting the present seems to like it. Hares. Oh, there are presents too. Or rather, a mailbox. Well, the one getting the present seems to like it. Hares. That punch looks really tempting. It smells like blackberries. That reminds me of Mum's tasty blackberry pie. I would love to have a big piece of that right now. I hope Mum's pie won't be cold when I get in. Ooh, there are the glow nuts.
Aren't they fascinating? The juice they contain attracts fireflies by the score.
I could really use something like that.
Then take one, but be careful. If they burst, there will be glow juice everywhere.
Perfect. It glows so pretty, but it sure is heavy.
I've got to tell you a joke.
Love to hear it.
Well, why do bees hum?
No idea.
Because... oh, I forgot.
Oh,
But you'll like this one. Why do mice usually avoid drinking too much blue juice?
well,
Because... I just can't remember punchlines. But I've got one more. A rabbit couple is booked on a luxury cruise. At the quay, they get stopped because there are too many of them. Why?
I don't know.
Because Because I don't know either.
Pity.
If you pass it on, maybe someone will know the answer. Someone with a sense of humour.
I wrote down as much as Jonathan can remember.